I've got the first track on what's forecast to become a hurricane in the Western Caribbean, with tropical storm warnings now in effect for Jamaica. Your forecast across the Caribbean and the Bahamas starts right now.
This is Meteo Mundo.
Hi friends, Rusty back here at Meteo Mundo. We're your home for Caribbean weather, and it's nice to see you on a late Sunday. Coming up in this video, we now have potential tropical cyclone number 18, which is forecast to become a hurricane. I've got the first advisory, the first track from the National Hurricane Center. We have more active weather through portions of the Greater Antilles to the Turks and the Caicos, and potentially more tropical weather for the week ahead as well. A lot to get into in this video. As always, I'd love to hear from you guys. You let me know in the comments section below where you're viewing from, what the weather has been like. Okay, so we've been monitoring this area for what seems like forever. Now we do have potential tropical cyclone number 18. We do have a track for the Hurricane Center. My system has yet to pick up on that first initial track. It still shows it as an invest, but I'll show you that from the National Hurricane Center coming up. But the area we have been monitoring now is PTC number 18. And I know it can be confusing. A potential tropical cyclone means that we are more than likely going to get a tropical storm to develop in this area. It just hasn't happened as of yet, but it is forecast to impact land within 48 hours. So the National Hurricane Center designates this because they don't want something to develop right on top of a populated area and to have no lead time, to have watches and warnings that haven't been issued well ahead of the storm actually moving in. We now have a tropical storm warning for Jamaica and a hurricane watch for the Cayman Islands. So again, we've just been watching this area in the Southwest Caribbean, getting more and more organized right now. We're starting to consolidate a center of circulation, and I do expect relatively rapid intensification with this storm overnight, especially into Monday and Tuesday, as the system generally travels to the north and then eventually towards the north and to the west. Now ahead of it, we've already had some healthy showers and storms develop over Jamaica, portions of Haiti, the eastern sides of Cuba, and it's those areas in the Cayman Islands that will feel the direct impacts on what is soon to become Raphael. So here is the first track from the National Hurricane Center late on this Sunday. Again, it's a potential tropical cyclone, but it is forecast to become Tropical Storm Raphael and then Hurricane Raphael just south of western Cuba as we get into early on Wednesday. So this is the first track from the National Hurricane Center. The blue, the tropical storm warning in effect for Jamaica right now. You can see it's forecast to move just west of Jamaica very late Monday into early on Tuesday as a tropical storm. Again, that's not a great path because all of the bad weather, all of the worst weather, if you will be on the eastern side of the storm. The heaviest rains and the strongest winds is then forecast to track right over the Cayman Islands, Grand Cayman, Little Cayman, Cayman Brac as a tropical storm. But the government of the Cayman Islands have actually issued hurricane watches for the islands. That means hurricane conditions are possible. So it will all depend on whether it becomes a hurricane before it gets into the Cayman Islands. And then it is forecast for the National Hurricane Center to become a Category 1 hurricane late Tuesday, early on Wednesday, move across the western tip of Cuba, and then eventually into the southeast and then central Gulf of Mexico late in the week. And we'll talk about what might be happening in the Gulf as we move throughout the video as well. So again, recapping, tropical storm warning in effect for Jamaica right now. That means tropical storm conditions are likely across the island. That will begin later on Monday. A hurricane watch in effect for the Cayman Islands. Now, as of this video recording, there are no watches and warnings for Cuba. Again, it's the local government that will be issuing the watches and warnings. The National Hurricane Center will pass that along. And of course, I pass along the local and official information as well. If you do live on Cuba, make sure you check in with local governments. I would expect watches and warnings to be issued very, very shortly because obviously we're going to see impacts there. Potential impacts for places like the Florida Keys and potentially as far northeast as Andros in the Bahamas and as far west of the northeast Yucatan. I don't expect there to be a lot of impact in those areas, but when I show you the time of arrival of the tropical storm force conditions, you notice that on the eastern side it does brush Andros, and on the far western side it does brush the northeast Yucatan, including Cancun and Cosmo, but no significant or persistent impacts in those areas. But for Jamaica, Cuba, and the Cayman Islands. These are your estimated times of tropical storm force winds arriving in your area. It will start to approach Jamaica throughout Monday afternoon and into the evening hours. So the weather in Jamaica just going downhill tomorrow. We'll have waves of showers and storms and squally weather across Jamaica well before the center of circulation arrives, but the tropical storm force sustained winds will be approaching the island late afternoon, early evening, then getting kind of into the eastern side and the south sides of Cuba throughout the overnight hours into Tuesday, approaching the Cayman Islands at about that same point in time, and then moving north and west, progressing Tuesday into western Cuba, and then eventually into the southeast Gulf of Mexico, where the Florida Keys and the far southern sides of Florida could potentially see some tropical storm conditions, especially the lower Keys as we get into Tuesday night, but especially into Wednesday morning. All right, so now let's deep dive. We'll start off looking at all the models, and then we'll kind of take a look at, again, some of the impacts that I expect out of this. Still going to get some heavy rain ahead of this actually moving into the area, guys. There's been a lot of lightning with these storms, very convective. We've had some gusty winds for portions of southeast sides of Cuba and the Turks, the Caicos. But again, we're just starting to see the low-level center consolidate. You can clearly see that broad spit here over the southwest Caribbean, just really beginning to kind of consolidate. You notice some good thunderstorm activity there. Still a little bit elongated on the eastern side. I think this is going to end up being a very small, compact storm. So the tropical storm force winds, and especially if this becomes a hurricane, the hurricane force winds sustained won't be extended very far from the center of circulation and will more than likely be lopsided on the eastern sides. But again, that's not great news for places like Jamaica, maybe Little Cayman, Cayman Brac, and portions of Cuba as well. All right, let's deep dive into the models and we'll take a look at those. First, we'll start off with the GFS, but I promise you we're going to be looking at a ton of different models. Now that this is an invest and a potential tropical cyclone, we do have all of the tropical models running on this. So we're going to look at some of those high-resolution tropical models coming up. But we'll start off with the GFS deterministic, and you're going to see the time frame here on the top left-hand side of your screen. So again, for my friends in Jamaica, this is the first area that's going to be directly impacted. Now, we're going to get some impacts for Haiti, especially along the peninsula towards Lacaille, but there are no tropical storm watches and warnings for Haiti at this point in time. So for my friends in Jamaica, again, the weather just starting to go downhill throughout the day tomorrow. Please check in with your local government, your local officials, if there's potentially any curfews or potentially wrapping up work a little bit early on our Monday. Again, this is not forecast to become a hurricane before it moves near Jamaica. So these will be tropical storm conditions, more than likely 40 to 60 mile an hour winds with some higher gusts. Yes, that could lead to some flooding, landslides, and mudslides. Yes, this could lead to some power outages. It's not going to be barrel higher impacts, but there will be some impacts out of this storm. So again, just showing you kind of the stair-stepping back and forth the time frame here. This is about 4 o'clock on our Monday, and we'll start to see what, again, is expected to become Raphael by this point in time, basically on the GFS model, move right over the island. So very late Monday into early on Tuesday. This is about 1:45 a.m. Now 4 a.m. you can see the center of circulation moving right across Jamaica. So most impacts for Jamaica late Monday into early on Tuesday. As we get into daybreak on Tuesday, we'll start to see the storm pull away to the north and to the west. Now the GFS model has this east of Grand Cayman, but basically right over Little Cayman and Cayman Brac. So more significant impacts on the GFS model for Little Cayman and Cayman Brac compared to Grand Cayman, because again, this should be a small storm and it's going to be weaker on the western side. The heaviest rain and the gusty winds will always be in that right front quadrant, which means Cuba is going to get raked significantly. The eastern side of the island some, but certainly the central and the western side of the island as well. The GFS deterministic pulls it over Cuba as we get into Wednesday morning. That would bring a closer approach to places like Key West and Marathon, and even Island Mirada and Key Largo in the Florida Keys, and then moving it up the west coast of Florida. Now, the GFS also kind of just weakens the storm as it's off the west coast of Florida as we get into Thursday and Friday. This is also the far eastern outlier of all the models that I'm going to be showing you. Could this bring wet, squally weather to Florida? Absolutely. Thursday and Friday. Am I expecting this to be an impactful storm at this point in time for Florida? No, outside of the Florida Keys and the far southwest sides of Florida. But I'm not extremely concerned at this point in time about this holding together. We'll look at some of the things and some of the reasons why that wouldn't be the case. But you can, again, clearly see, and I'm just going to show you a broader perspective here on the GFS. We'll let it loop up. It just starts to weaken here in the eastern Gulf of Mexico. There's going to be some wind shear. There's going to be a weak front to our north here, and just stronger winds are going to try and rip apart this storm. Slightly cooler waters now in the northern Gulf of Mexico as well, still supporting tropical development or tropical, storm moving in, but just not allowing it to just rapidly intensify like we saw with Helene and Milton. So again, one more loop here of the GFS. You can see it starting off right over Jamaica, towards the eastern sides of the Cayman Islands, over Cuba, near Key West, and then up the eastern coast, the western coast of Florida. Let's look at the wind profile here. So that's the overall rain. It is going to be moving relatively quickly. There is still going to be some flood concerns for Jamaica and Cuba. There's some higher terrain in some of those islands, okay? Grand Cayman, Little Cayman, Cayman Brac, probably not as much rain. Winds would be a little bit more of a concern there. And then we'll see how it plays out down the road for, again, portions of the Florida Keys especially. We would have brushed impacts, isolated impacts for portions of the central and northwest Bahamas. Now, look, we continue to have gale conditions even outside of this tropical system developing here, Rafael developing for portions of the Bahamas and the Turks, the Caicos, but this would be a secondary impact there. So let's now take a look at the wind profile field out of this. So I'm going to back this up. These are going to be your sustained winds at the surface. So this would be exactly what we'd be seeing from the National Hurricane Center. These aren't just gusts. And again, this is going to be tomorrow night or Monday night. So let's get back into that. We'll start off at around the 5 o'clock time frame. We would have here still a developing storm, probably very close to becoming a tropical storm right about that time frame. I do expect this to become a tropical storm before it gets to Jamaica. The GFS is actually slightly weaker than most of the models, but even here we have sustained winds right at the threshold of a tropical storm just before it gets into the south side of the island. So time frame wise, this is basically midnight Monday into early on Tuesday. And again, the GFS model takes it right over the island. So that's why I'm talking about winds that sustained will be over 40 miles an hour. But when I show you some of the other models, they're more in that 55, 60 mile an hour frame. And you can see this encompasses the entire island. You would have the spin here with the elongated tropical storm force winds on the northeast side of the circulation, which means all of Jamaica. So it doesn't really matter if you live in Morant Bay or Kingston, Portmore, Spanish Town, or Mandeville, Maypen, or Savlamar, Negril, Montego Bay, Ocho Rios, Port Maria, Port Antonio. It doesn't really matter. I think we're going to see tropical storm conditions across the entire island. Now, obviously, there could be a bit of a surge towards the port here, towards Kingston, on the southeast side of the island, with the wind profile coming from the north and from the south into the east and moving north and west. And we'll look at that wind profile coming up as well. But a minor storm surge is possible with this. But again, not expected to become a hurricane. The GFS tries to wrap this up a little bit more right over Little Cayman and Cayman Brac. I mean just to the east. But if this holds together, we start to get a higher end tropical storm, not a hurricane yet, right? Then as we move closer to landfall again in western Cuba, again, it's close to becoming a hurricane, but we don't ever fully get it on the GFS, all right? So even though the National Hurricane Center has become a hurricane, the GFS isn't really quite there, at least on this latest model run. It's been moving back and forth. This time yesterday, the GFS did have this becoming a hurricane. Now, as we get into Wednesday afternoon, again, on the GFS, which is farther east, so more impacts for places like Key West, Florida there. Again, we have very solid tropical storm force sustained winds, by the way, again, getting close to a lot of the lower keys here, right? And even as we get towards Marathon, Tavernier, Island Murata, Key Largo, areas like that would not be as directly impacted. Putting this into motion, we can clearly see it holding together somewhat, but then dissipating as it gets pushed up to the north and to the west, okay? So that's what the wind profile looks like as far as wind speeds. The next thing I want to do is actually put on the wind contours. All right, and so this is going to show the direction of the winds and how they move. Now, obviously, we get counterclockwise winds around an area of low pressure, which of course our tropical systems are here in the northern hemisphere. But I want to show you again how these winds are going to potentially impact where some of the water might pile up. So just letting that loop up one time real quick, and then we'll stop it here. So for my friends in Jamaica, it'll mainly be an easterly wind to begin with, but as the storm comes in, if it comes either over the island or just to the west, which most of the models show, you notice that there will be a south to a southeast wind near the Kingston area and other coastal areas of the south central and southeast side of the island. That means the water is trying to pile up a bit. Now again, I don't expect there to be the pile up of wind like we with wind and waves and seas like we had with Beryl, but some coastal inundation or storm surge is possible with this. So please keep that in mind, all right? If the center is as far west as Negril or offshore, that means the entire island gets the onshore winds for a time as the storm moves in. Then the storm again pulls off to the north and to the west, and you can see it does try and strengthen there again just east of Little Cayman and Cayman Brac. And again, we have, regardless of this, near gale conditions through the Bahamas. I'll just continue to let this load so you guys can get an idea. Not really worried about a storm surge along the west coast of Florida or the Florida Keys yet, although portions of the Florida Keys may have some kind of a storm surge forecast produced by the National Hurricane Center down the road. We just don't have that as of yet. Okay, so looking at that, what are the impacts expected for the major areas right now? For Jamaica, winds of 40 to 60 miles an hour and some higher gusts starting throughout the day Monday, but especially late tomorrow and then into early on Tuesday. Rainfall 3 to 6 inches, locally 9 inches possible. That could lead to some mudslides. For the Cayman Islands, it's 60 to 80 mile an hour winds, again, based on the fact there's a hurricane watch in effect for the Cayman Islands. Locally higher gusts if Rafael develops that fast. 2 to 4 inches, locally higher. Be more about the wind than the rain in the Cayman Islands. Now for western and central Cuba, 65 to 80 mile an hour winds sustained with some higher gusts. Locally 3 to 6 inches of rain, but higher than that in some spots, up to 9 inches. Again, landslides and mudslides if we get that kind of high rainfall totals. Obviously, power outages are going to be a big problem as well. For these areas, please check in with your local governments as far as any official messaging for what you may need to do to prepare for this storm. I obviously pass along that local information, but things change very quickly, especially with a fast developing system. If we look at the European model, deterministic, this is the main run of the European model. It does have it just west of Jamaica, closer to Grand Cayman, basically splitting Grand Cayman, Little Cayman, and Cayman Brac, but as a weaker system, not becoming a hurricane here on the European model, and then actually kind of fading as it goes off towards the west. So we'll see that again, same time frame, late Monday, early Tuesday for Jamaica, throughout the day on Tuesday for the Cayman Islands, late Tuesday, Wednesday for the western sides of Cuba, and then actually kind of just stalling and drifting back out towards the west here, and ultimately dying out as it moves into the western Gulf of Mexico, okay? The GFS ensemble, so we looked at the deterministic, the ensemble members look like this, meaning that there's 51 different members of the GFS. Where do we paint it on? There's not a lot of disagreement with the ensembles here. They're pretty tightly clustered. The deterministic is the far eastern outlier. As far as that goes, you can see most of the ensemble members have this in the central Gulf of Mexico as we get into next weekend, just like the European model. I do want to highlight, because we're going to have to talk about this later in the video, is that there's the potential for other tropical development here about the same time frame next weekend. It's a weak potential, and it's a low chance, meaning weak development, low chance, but it's not out of the question that back to the Turks, the Caicos, Hispaniola, the Lesser Antilles and Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, we might be talking about yet another system moving that way. This is the European ensemble members. So again, all the different ensemble members with the European model. you can see they start to spread apart a little bit here late in the period, but they favor the western side of the Gulf of Mexico down the road as well. So again, the GFS, deterministic, is the eastern outlier. The European ensembles are farther west. Now, to be clear, most of the European ensembles begin to dissipate this storm before it gets anywhere near Louisiana, Texas, or Mexico. I'm not saying that we're not going to get impacts in the Gulf Coast states out of this, but we start to weaken this storm in general as it gets closer to the northern Gulf Coast states, regardless of where it goes, Florida to Texas. So that's good news. Not saying we're not going to have some impacts, but more than likely we're not going to have a high-end tropical storm or a hurricane trying to slam in. So now I'm going to show you 3 different high-resolution tropical models running. All of them are going to be stronger than what I just showed you on the GFS and the European. There's one main reason. All of them have initialized the storm stronger than what it is right now. So the Hurricane Center is discounting this a little bit, but we'll see if we can get this rapid intensification to happen out of these storms. I hope it's not the case, and I hope this is overshooting things, but let me show you what these look like. We'll start off with the HMON model here. The bottom right-hand side of your screen, the max number, that's the max sustained winds on the model. Now this kind of, again, gets close to the panhandle of Florida before dissipating. So over Jamaica, you'll see that develop there, winds of around 60 to 65. Over the Cayman Islands, it starts to become a hurricane, topping off with winds of around 105 near Cuba. That would be a Category 2. And then as it gets closer to Florida, but far enough off the west coast where we don't have the biggest impacts, it does begin to weaken. But again, over Jamaica, 65-mile-an-hour winds, closer to a hurricane over the Cayman Islands, certainly a hurricane over western Cuba, tropical storm conditions for portions of the Keys, and then hopefully, again, just beginning to dissipate a bit late into the week off the west coast of Florida. This is the HWRF model. Okay, again, it's an eastern outlier, if you will, or it favors the GFS as far as where it might be going. As far as intensity goes here, again, we're looking at going just on the western side of Jamaica, high tropical storm. This is a stronger model. Actually has it become a Category 3 hurricane on the western sides of Cuba. I hope this is a tremendous big outlier and not really plausible, but again, just showing you, because the HWRF model is a high resolution hurricane model that we use a lot here, right? And so we don't want to discount it fully, especially with a storm that's just developing, but obviously this has extreme intensification for a storm in November. But one more time on this, again, towards Jamaica, high-end tropical storm, over the Cayman Islands as a hurricane, and then a major hurricane over the western sides of Cuba. We would have high-end tropical storm impacts for portions of the Keys and close enough to the west coast of Florida where we would certainly have to monitor that. HAFS-A model, okay? This is another strong storm on the HAFS-A model. You can see this begin to wrap up. Again, track just west of Cuba. Or excuse me, just west of Jamaica, right over Grand Cayman. This is a little bit farther west track, but again, becoming a major hurricane as it gets close to Cuba. So again, we are west of Jamaica, but still tropical storm conditions here. More impacts for Grand Cayman on the HAFS-A model, right over the western tip of Cuba, and then into the south central Gulf of Mexico as a strong storm. Take myself off camera again, just look at those numbers. Again, we're actually approaching, a hurricane just northwest of Jamaica, certainly a hurricane near Grand Cayman, a Cat 3 hurricane near western Cuba, and then still staying a relatively strong storm as it gets into the south central Gulf of Mexico. Again, the Hurricane Center, in their first discussion with the storm, discounted these models because they initialized what is potential tropical cyclone number 18 too strong. So we'll see how that plays out. Real quick, friends, if you've gotten anything out of this video so far, thank you for liking the video, subscribing, sharing this with your family and friends. Thank you for finding ways to support the channel. The membership, that's the join button. The super thanks is always open. You can find other ways to support the channel in the description below. Again, thank you so much for liking and subscribing. That's the easiest things for you guys to do. Again, PTC number 18. I hope we have covered that a lot. If you have a specific question about the forecast, feel free to drop it in the comments section below. Obviously, we have other areas to talk about, okay? We've had impactful weather today through portions of the Turks and the Caicos, the southeast Bahamas, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, and Haiti, portions of the Lesser Antilles as well, showers and storms. So just getting back to this, and there's something else that you can probably see there that I haven't even mentioned yet that we'll get into. I'm going to try and throw wind gusts on here real quickly as well. And you can just see some of the winds that we've had across this area for today. Do you notice there are now two areas of yellow on top of each other? Well, the first one, which is our little dinky 10% chance here, is not going to develop. That's the one that's currently right over the Turks, the Caicos. However, this broader area in yellow is the secondary system that could potentially develop late week and into next weekend. It's a low chance right now for the National Hurricane Center, but this is taking the exact same track what ultimately ended up being Oscar did. It's taking the exact same track of the impactful weather we've had the last several days in this area. It's something to monitor. You can clearly see all of the wind, 30, 35 mile an hour wind gusts, kicking up surf and sea conditions, bringing heavy rain to portions of the area, especially from St. Lucia north for today, Guadalupe and Dominica and Montserrat and Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis and St. Martin. We've had some showers and storms over portions of the U.S. and British Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico as well. And again, the Dominican Republic and Haiti, just really active weather across these areas. I've had several pictures and videos that you guys have sent in. Let's just take a look at some of those. This is from Guanaja, Honduras. Henry sent me this gorgeous shot. Just take a look. Look at that purple. I'm not sure if he used a filter or not, but regardless, it's an excellent photo and I had to show it. So Henry, thank you for sending that in. Let's go to the British Virgin Islands. The Essentials sent this one in from Tortola. There in the British Virgin Islands. Look at that rainbow. What a gorgeous shot. But you can clearly see that there's been some impactful and turbulent weather across the British Virgin Islands there. You're speaking of that. Kevin from La Pared Beach in Luquilla, Puerto Rico said it was really kicked up. Look at those breakers right there at the beach. Rip currents are big time, and he said that they had some seas there, some swells around 14 to 15 feet. How about that? But you get the breakers and the churned up water there right along the coastline. You don't want to be getting into the water there. Appreciate Kevin sending that in. Okay, so now let's break down kind of the rest of the forecast, including what might be happening in this area. So back over to the GFS model. And of course, we're going to look at rainfall totals coming up, so stick around for that. And also take a look at the sea conditions as well for all of you boaters. So still more to get into with the video. But just to kind of get into how this could potentially be developing, again, not expecting there to be a high chance of this, but just like the system that we're still dealing with, we could have a large area, a wide area of gale force conditions, locally heavy rainfall that could lead to more flooding, regardless of this system wants to try and wrap up again. So let me take out the yellow area here, and you can see it coming in from the GFS model. Clear as day, there it goes. So let's back this up timing-wise. Look, it's still going to be wet in this area over the next couple of days, right? Let's go back a little bit further in time here. So as we get into tomorrow, heaviest rain, Turks and Caicos, portions of the Bahamas, and then eventually down the road here towards the end of the week, this is Thursday morning, the 7th, we can start to see that system move in. So again, with south winds coming in, we could pull in a lot of moisture across the Lesser Antilles, a little bit more impactful for the Leeward Islands, the U.S. and British Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico, and of course down the road, just like we had with this last system, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, the Turks and Caicos, and the Bahamas as well. Notice it doesn't really wrap up in anything too significant, but it's there, right? We can clearly see it moving in here as we get towards Thursday. This is Friday the 8th, and then Saturday the 9th coming through. Let's go back over to the wind profile with this and take a look at it. Look, guys, the bottom line is I expect this to be tropically, expect it to be a pretty active first half of November. We are still in hurricane season till the end of November, and that's just a date on the calendar. You know that we've had some storms past November 30th. And the interesting thing is that I know we've had some lulls in activity here from time to time, right? But that being said, Raphael will be the 17th named storm of the Atlantic hurricane season. And we may not be done, right? So there it is right there. So while we're watching what happens with Raphael in the Gulf of Mexico, we'll be monitoring this one. Here's your Thursday and into Friday. And again, you can see it beginning to move into the Turks and Caicos. Now, we don't want to focus on any one area at this point in time, but just to show you again, if I pause this, right about here, and again, every time I do that, it jumps time, so I have to go back. So if we pause that right about here, we're real close to a depression, maybe a tropical storm, but the biggest thing is that we can clearly see a defined center of circulation here from the GFS model. So this is just not some broad area of wind like the Bahamas have been seeing, just straight line gale force winds. This is a true low level center trying to wrap up here, getting closer to the Greater Antilles and Turks, the Caicos, and the Bahamas. And again, that would be for next weekend. Back out to the GFS rain, just to talk about other areas. Now look, if I haven't mentioned your area a ton, it's because you're not going to see the most impactful weather over the week. With what's going to be Rafael moving east of the Yucatan and Central America, your rainfall totals will be slightly lower than other areas. Doesn't mean we're still not going to have some locally heavy rain, especially back down towards Panama and Costa Rica, because we've continued to see that. But portions of Nicaragua and Honduras would see some heavier rains as well, but just not as persistent and not as much as what we're expecting for the other areas off towards the east. My friends in the ABC Islands have the opportunity for some rain. I hope you got some rain on this Sunday, but you can clearly see that there will be some wet weather. This is just a really active forecast, guys, over the next week or 10 days. It doesn't matter whether you're in the direct impact of Rafael or not. There's a lot of wind and rain here coming up. There's a lot of lift in the atmosphere still here in the Caribbean and the Western Atlantic, and even portions of the Gulf of Mexico as well. Just really active weather. So when we look at the wave heights again, boaters, mariners, please be very cautious. Gale conditions are still possible on the eastern side of the Bahamas the next several days. Again, based off the GFS model, we would start to see those wave heights really intensify. Obviously, for any fishermen, any boaters, Jamaica, Cayman Islands, Cuba, Haiti, please be very cautious. Again, check in with local officials, small craft advisories or small craft remaining in port, or any high seas advisories that might be issued in these areas. But you can just see the impactful weather continuing to come in here. And again, portions of the Turks and Caicos and the northern sides of Haiti and the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico will just continue to get battered by some swells and some strong northeast winds. Rainfall totals, again, could be quite high along the path of what's to be Rafael. On the European model, we can clearly see that moving right over Jamaica, portions of the Cayman Islands, Cuba, eastern sides of the Gulf of Mexico, where again, 3 to 6 inches, but locally up to 9 is possible. We see the broad, heavy rainfall for the Lesser Antilles, the U.S. and British Virgin Islands, Hispaniola, the Turks and Caicos. They're more like 2 to 4, but locally 6 inches or higher. Again, 4 inches of rain is 100 millimeters. So a lot of areas will be more than that. Again, a little bit quieter for the Yucatan, northern Central America. Very heavy rainfall down towards Panama and Costa Rica. Okay, friends. So again, looking at this one more time, this is potential tropical cyclone number 18. It is forecast officially from the National Hurricane Center to become a hurricane just south and west of Cuba late Tuesday, early on Wednesday. Impacts for Jamaica, Cayman Islands, and Cuba, potentially down the road for the Florida Keys as well. I'll keep you covered here at Meteo Mundo. You can follow us across all of our social media platforms. We're on Instagram, TikTok, X, Facebook. You can send me a picture or video, myMediamundo@gmail.com. If you're going to ask in the comment section, yes, I will be going live covering this storm. We'll break down that time frame as this develops. It's just so early in the time. I don't want to give a specific time when I'm going live yet, but I'll have more on that coming up, and obviously additional video updates as well. If you have questions about the forecast, drop it in the comment section below. While you're down there, thank you for liking and subscribing. Appreciate you guys sticking around towards the end of the video. You guys have a great rest of your Sunday. I'm back tomorrow with all the latest details for you right here at Meteo Mundo.